He came from a long line of samurai whose ancient tradition stressed obedience, and yet he was about to defy his government. In 1939, this humble Japanese diplomat was stationed in Lithuania. Nazi Germany had just invaded Poland to the west. The Soviet Union's forces drew closer to the east, and thousands of Jewish refugees were now stranded in Lithuania. If he helped them, he'd be risking his career. But if he didn't, he'd be abandoning thousands to the Nazis. So why did this Japanese diplomat risk it all to help thousands of Jews escape the Holocaust? Chiune Sugihara was a loving husband and a nurturing father. According to his wife, he was a total softie who never lost his temper and had a hard time disciplining the kids. Sending a man like that to Eastern Europe in 1939 was like launching a paper lantern in the middle of a storm. And yet, here he was, the right person in the right place at exactly the right time. Japan sent him to Lithuania to open a consulate service. His main job was to gather intelligence that could inform Japan's diplomatic and military strategies in the region. But as soon as he got to work, the whole world was upended. Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany in response. World War II had begun. The German invasion sent waves of Jewish refugees streaming across the border into Lithuania. They brought chilling stories about what Germany did to its Jews. Harsh laws that stripped them of their rights and property. Forced relocation to ghettos and concentration camps. Brutal attacks and mass murders. Many feared that Lithuania could be the next country to fall. The Jewish refugees were terrified. They couldn't let the German nightmare catch up with them. They needed help. They needed a way to escape Europe. And then, the Soviets invaded Lithuania. The Soviets weren't on the same side as Germany, but they weren't exactly friendly to the Jews either. Lithuania was now caught between a hammer and an anvil, occupied by one empire with the Third Reich at its doorstep. The Soviet authorities ordered all foreign embassies to leave, but as Sugihara was packing his belongings, he discovered a group of Jewish refugees waiting to speak with him. They had hatched an elaborate plan to escape from Europe, but they couldn't pull it off without Sugihara's help. The Soviets wouldn't let them leave Lithuania unless another country would accept them, but they couldn't find anyone willing to take them in. They finally discovered that a small Dutch island didn't require entrance visas. A kind-hearted Dutch consul had already stamped their passports, but the Germans had blocked their way out. Their only hope of getting to the Caribbean was to go east across the Soviet Union. But the Soviets had no interest in welcoming a bunch of Jews in case they happened to get stuck. So the Soviet consul gave them a condition. They'd be allowed in if they got a transit visa proving that they would be allowed to cross the border and go east. Japan is a small island nation. Still, it had invaded and occupied most of its neighbors, which meant that if the Jews needed to leave the USSR for points east, they'd have to go through Japanese-occupied territory. So they turned to Sugihara, the only person with the power to grant Japanese visas. But when he cabled the Japanese ministry back home, his request was denied. Again and again and again. What could he do? Defying his orders would destroy his career. He'd be unable to provide for his family. Even worse, he'd be tainting them. Disobeying orders was a matter of honor and loyalty, and the Japanese government took honor and loyalty very, very seriously. But how could he ignore the hundreds of desperate families who stood outside his gates? Sugihara wanted to protect his family. He wanted to preserve his diplomatic career and maintain his honor. But he was haunted by the words of an old samurai maxim. Even a hunter cannot kill a bird which flies to him for refuge. It's easy to view crowds of desperate refugees as anonymous foreigners, as someone else's problem. But Sugihara saw fellow human beings in need, and he couldn't look away.
こっちで拒絶するともうソ連のビザもらったって何もならんし、ナチに捕まって、そして要するにガス中毒難民も困ったわけですね。行くところがない。
But the hard part was just beginning. Each visa had to be written and signed by hand. The clock was ticking. It was only a matter of time before the Soviets forced him to leave the country. For nearly a month, he spent up to 20 hours a day writing visas. He hardly slept. He hardly ate. His wife brought him meals so he wouldn't have to stop writing, and she even massaged his cramped hands at the end of each day. A seemingly endless stream of Jewish refugees lined up in front of the consulate day and night. Their lives depended on the speed of Sugihara's pen. Eventually, the Soviets forced him to evacuate the consulate.
8月の末まで書き続けました。その間、ソ連の領事館の方から退去を命じられたんです。3回。それも聞き流していたんですけれども、3回目にはどうしてももう退去してくれということ。
According to some accounts, Sugihara kept issuing visas on his way to the train station. He passed visas into the crowd through the window of the train, continuing to write even as the train pulled away from the station. Some even say that as the train sped away, he yelled out to the crowd of Jewish refugees, "Please forgive me. I cannot write anymore." Within the year, Germany invaded Lithuania. By the end of the war, 90% of Lithuania's Jews were dead. The number would have been higher if not for Sugihara. His visas enabled thousands of Jews to escape Lithuania. They traveled east by train across the Soviet Union to Japan, and then scattered around the world to build new lives as strangers in strange lands. After he was forced to leave Lithuania, Sugihara was reassigned to various Japanese consulates around Europe for the remainder of the war. But remember, Japan was allies with the Nazis, and they lost. So when the war finally ended, the Soviets didn't let Sugihara go. Instead, they imprisoned him and his family in a Soviet POW camp for 18 months. But when they were finally allowed to return home, Japan dismissed Sugihara from the diplomatic service. The official reasoning was downsizing, but Sugihara was convinced that it was due to his disobedience. His career was shattered. He took on menial jobs to support his family. The story of his kindness and self-sacrifice might have died with him, if not for one grateful man. A man whose life was saved by the stroke of the diplomat's pen when he was just a boy. A man who now worked in the Israeli embassy in Tokyo and was determined to find his savior. He finally tracked down Sugihara, who the Israeli government celebrated as a hero. Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust recognized him as righteous among the nations, an honor awarded to the non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Eventually, his own government acknowledged what he'd done. They restored his honorable legacy with a formal apology, and he's now celebrated in Japan as a heroic symbol of humanity and compassion. According to Jewish tradition, whoever saves a single life has saved an entire world. But Sugihara didn't just save 6,000 individual Jews. The people he saved went on to have children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, roughly 40,000 of them by some estimates.
Every single person that survived Sugihara went on to make a family, and they have children. In my case, there's a few hundred descendants.
40,000 lives, 40,000 souls, 40,000 worlds that only exist because in a time of darkness, Sugihara risked everything to be a shining light.